Morning, everyone. A couple of stories to get to: a petition ending, a petition beginning, and the People's Party name is generating lawsuits. I've seen that. But first, the biggest story of the administration, of Justin Trudeau's administration, and the story that is eating the Liberal cabinet alive. Jody Wilson-Raybould told cabinet SNC Lavalin pressure was improper, the Globe and Mail reports. Former Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould told federal cabinet ministers she believed it was improper for officials in the Prime Minister's office to press her to help SNC Lavalin Group out of its legal difficulties, sources say. The Globe and Mail reported on February 7th that officials in the PMO put pressure on Ms. Wilson-Raybould to reach a negotiated settlement with SNC Lavalin on bribery and fraud charges the company faces. In the ensuing political fallout, Ms. Wilson-Raybould has resigned from her cabinet position, and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's principal secretary, Gerald Butts, has stepped down. On Tuesday, Ms. Wilson-Raybould privately outlined her concerns about handling of the SNC Lavalin prosecution to her former colleagues within the confidentiality of cabinet, freed from the bounds of solicitor-client privilege that have restricted her public statements so far. On Wednesday, she rose in the House of Commons and said she hoped to have solicitor-client privilege waived so she could, quote, speak my truth. According to sources with knowledge of the cabinet discussion, Ms. Wilson-Raybould said that the director of the prosecution service rejected a negotiated settlement with SNC Lavalin based on how the law applies to the company's case. The Liberal government had changed the criminal code to allow for deferred prosecutions in which a company admits wrongdoing and pays a fine but avoids a trial. Under Canada's new deferred prosecution agreement law, prosecutors are not allowed to consider national economic interests when deciding whether to settle with a company. I just want to hold on here. This law was brought in under Bill C-34, which is a financial bill looked at by the Finance Committee, not the Justice Committee. And they had somebody from the Justice Committee come in and explain why they used the tool, but they never had the Justice Committee look at the tool. So they snuck it in with not the proper minister. So usually the Attorney General introduces criminal code changes, not finance ministers, right? The finance minister shouldn't be changing the criminal code of Canada. But that's what happened in this case. You can check Bill C-74 and specifically Dan Albus for a good explanation of that. I've done a video on him and what he said previously. I will try to remember to put the link in the description. Okay, back to the article here. Mr. Trudeau has acknowledged he raised concerns about economic impact that a conviction could have on SNC Lavalin when he met privately with the then Justice Minister and Attorney General on September 17, 2 weeks after the Director of Public Prosecutions decided to move toward a trial. The fact that prosecutors had already informed the Quebec company of its decision before the meeting between Mr. Trudeau and Ms. Wilson-Raybould meant that the only remaining question was whether the Attorney General would override federal prosecutors and publicly instruct them to cut a deal. When Ms. Wilson-Raybould asked the Prime Minister to clarify if he was directing her to order a settlement, Mr. Trudeau said that he told her the decision to direct prosecutors to settle with SNC Lavalin was hers alone to make. A Liberal source who was granted anonymity because they were not authorized to speak publicly said SNC Lavalin was looking for a way out of the prosecution and warned on September 18 that the Montreal-based engineering and construction giant might have to move to Britain or that it could face a takeover bid. Now, they've recently spent close to $2 billion. I think it was $1.4 million to acquire one of Britain's historic construction and engineering firms. And I can't remember the name right now, but I will look for the name. And I found it. It didn't take long. The name is Atkins. So SNC acquired Atkins in 2017, which is a major British firm. And the valuation was 20 British pounds per share. I believe I highlighted it here. Nope, I didn't, or it's not been highlighted. Anyway, the funds created were, here it is. I'm sorry, I don't know why my highlighting didn't work. The funds created were 2080 British pounds in cash for each share. And so that's a $4.2 billion valuation. And acquisition financing was $1.5 billion loan from the CDPQ to SNC Lavalin. Right? The SNC Lavalin Highway Holdings, the entity that holds SNC Lavalin 16.77 share interests in Highways 407, and then a bunch of other financing and whatever. But here's another $400 million by the CDPQ. So as SNC Lavalin could just become Atkins and leave Canada. It would be a big hit. But I mean, if Britain has this law and they're allowed to break the law with impunity in Britain, well, they can have their two-tiered legal system. don't prefer that. Anyway, link is in the description to Atkins. Sorry for the aside. Back to this. So a Liberal source says, move to Britain or that it could face a takeover bid. Okay, the discussions about the fate of SNC did not end for weeks. The Prime Minister's former principal secretary, Mr. Butts, who had met with representatives of SNC-Lavalin, also discussed the possibility of a deferred prosecution agreement with Miss Wilson-Raybould on December 5th in the restaurant of Chateau Laurier Hotel. Once prosecutors decided in early September to move to trial, Miss Wilson-Raybould told Cabinet that she felt it was wrong for anyone, including the Prime Minister, members of his staff, and other government officials, to raise the issue with her, the source said. Another source added that Miss Wilson-Raybould would not budge from her position at the Cabinet meeting. The Liberal source said government officials had also proposed an outside panel of legal experts to recommend a solution to the SNC-Lavalin issue, but Miss Wilson-Raybould rejected the suggestion. I want to pause here as well, and I'm sorry for all the pausing, but part of this show is my comment, so here it is. Saying that the Liberal government, after the decision was made, wanted to push for another independent panel of legal experts, presumably handpicked by Gerald Butts or Justin Trudeau by GM Butts. That is not pressure. Like, that is describing political pressure. Like, listen, we understand that you have reservations about giving SNC-Lavalin this break, but we feel it's really important and maybe you've misunderstood the law. So we want to have this panel of legal experts look at it and recommend a solution to you, Miss AG. And when she said no, that's when they fired her, right? Like, is that not pressure? I think that's the definition of pressure. And what is being described here is very, very concerning. I don't know. And like I said, I'm not a lawyer. I'm a former education worker. And in that vein, this looks like, I don't know if a law has been broken with that, but probably. It sounds like probably. It sounds pretty close to me. So who knows, right? Back to the article. SNC-Lavalin mounted an intense campaign to persuade the Liberal government to reach a deferred prosecution agreement after the Director of Public Prosecutions decided on September 4th to continue with a criminal prosecution over the company's business dealings in Libya. The day after Prime Minister's meeting with Mr. Wilson-Raybould, SNC-Lavalin representatives met Finance Minister Bill Morneau and Chief of Staff Ben Chin. They also met separately with Michael Wernick and the Privy Council clerk and the country's top civil servant. Company representatives also raised the possibility of seeking a judicial review of the decision, which it has now done. A conviction for SNC-Lavalin would mean a 10-year ban from federal contracts. The Prime Minister told reporters on Wednesday that Ms. Wilson-Raybould was invited to Cabinet this week because, quote, I think it's extremely important that everyone have an opportunity to hear the different perspectives in this situation. Aha, she is experiencing it differently, right, Mr. Trudeau? Back to the article. On Wednesday in the House of Commons, Mr. Trudeau repeatedly avoided directly answering questions from the Conservative leader, Andrew Scheer, about who asked for the September 17 meeting and whether he expressed his support for granting SNC-Lavalin a settlement. The Prime Minister said he could not speak about the conversations with Ms. Wilson-Raybould because, quote, the meeting I have with my members of Cabinet are covered by Cabinet confidentiality. But time and again, in question period, he said anything he did was in the service of sustaining jobs in Canada. Quote, I have been unequivocal over the fall. I've been unequivocal now that we will always support Canadian jobs and growth for our economy. We will always stand up to protect our workers' rights across the country, Mr. Trudeau said, but we will always do that in ways that respect the independence of our judiciary, the rule of law, and the institutions that keep Canada one of the greatest democracies in the world. Wow. What trash. So what about the 100,000 or so jobs that have been lost in Alberta's energy sector, Mr. Trudeau? Why no emergency, I don't know, something breaks for them? Oh, because they're not breaking the law fundamentally? Why the scramble right now to save this company? Oh, because you're invested in it? Is that why? Maybe. It certainly stinks like it's more than just jobs. It certainly does. Okay, back to this. For her part, Ms. Wilson-Raybould continues to say she can't comment on the SNC-Lavalin affair that may have led to her demotion to Veteran Affairs in early January and later resignation from Cabinet last week. Ms. Wilson-Raybould said she is bound by Solicitor General privilege and has hired former Supreme Court of Canada Justice Thomas Cromwell to advise her on what she can say publicly. After question period, she rose in Parliament to say that she was unable to vote on an NDP motion calling for a judicial inquiry into SNC-Lavalin matter. Quote, the reason for my abstination is that the matter is part in part has to do with me personally, and I do not think that it is appropriate for me to vote on a matter that has to do with me personally, she said. I understand fully that Canadians want to know the truth and want transparency. Privilege and confidentiality are not mine to waive, and I hope that I have the opportunity to speak my truth. The two Liberal MPs, Nate Erskine Smith and Wayne Long, voted in favor of the NDP motion calling for a judicial inquiry. The Liberal majority defeated the motion. So two Liberals, only two, and they're both still living and breathing and still not ejected from caucus anyway. They're not sitting as independents as far as I know. They voted against this. They voted against their caucus and requested an independent public inquiry. And the Liberals said, nope, we're going to investigate ourselves, thanks. So if you've got a Liberal MP, send them a letter and ask them why they voted not to have a public inquiry on this, because that's the only way to clear the air. Quote, back to the article. The matter is being investigated by the Federal Ethics Commissioner, and the House Justice Committee is also holding limited hearings. Ms. Wilson-Raybould is expected to appear next week before the committee, but it is unclear what she will be able to say because of solicitor-client privilege. Although the Attorney General is a member of the federal cabinet, he or she is obliged to act independently of cabinet in criminal proceedings. A legal principle called the Shaw-Cross Doctrine, and I mentioned this before, I wanted to look into what it is, so this is what it is. It lays out how this works, and it is a constitutional convention in Britain that has been accepted into Canadian law. It's based on a ruling from Britain's House of Lords in 1951. It says that the Attorney General must take into account all relevant facts, and they are not obliged to consult with cabinet colleagues, but are free to do so. Cabinet colleagues cannot give the Attorney General direction, but can inform him or her of particular considerations which might affect the decision. However, such considerations must not consist in telling the Attorney General what the decision ought to be. Final responsibility for prosecution decisions rests with the Attorney General alone and must not be put under pressure in any direction. So again, I'm not a lawyer. Right? I'm a former education worker and just somebody who likes to look at politics, and I find it interesting. But looks like, I mean, there's some legal precedent for discussions around things and for having Ms. Wilson-Raybould be informed about what the cabinet conversations are. But it certainly doesn't look like there's precedent for pressure. It certainly doesn't look like there's precedent for maintaining jobs, especially because the legislation, the law change, the criminal code change says specifically that they're not allowed to consider the national money, like the national economic impact of it, right? So they're not allowed, specifically not allowed to consider jobs in this. So the whole jobs thing that Trudeau's trying to talk about and trying to push as his defense on this falls flat. One, because he's done absolutely nothing for Alberta. And two, because it's legally exempt. You can't bring that into consideration for this tool. And Jody Wilson-Raybould knows that, and anybody who's read the law knows it. So it seems really strange. Okay, the petitions that are ending. The petition that is ending is the immigration petition, and it was sponsored by Maxime Bernier. We've been talking about this for a while, and a lot of people have signed it. The total right now is 68,497, with Alberta having 17,000 or so signatures, Ontario having 20,000 or so, BC 11,000, Quebec 10,000. This is the petition against the Global Compact for Migration, sponsored by Maxime Bernier. So it's closing today. Last chance to sign it. Don't forget to check your email and click on the link they send you. Otherwise, your signature will not count. And the last story people have been sending me is, have you heard that the People's Party's name is up for grabs and whatever? And I discounted this story as just something that's trying to make news, trying to muddy the waters, trying to whatever. I thought it was frivolous. I thought it was a distraction, but I think this article bears that out. This is nothing more than ridiculousness, really. So Burnaby Now is reporting, BC man sues to stop Maxime Bernier from using the People's Party name in Burnaby South. And I'm just going to skip down here to the big parts here. Dillon claims he was the first to file the name with Elections Canada in late September 2018, weeks before Bernier, but Bernier beat him in the next step in the registration process by submitting paperwork including signatures from 250 supporters. Bernier was at an unfair disadvantage because he and his supporters live much closer to the Election Canada office in Quebec, Dillon said. And he said, this was all going on during the postal workers strike. providing an added hindrance to the BC-based party. A cease and desist letter sent to Bernier was met with deafening silence, Dillon said. Dillon is seeking an injunction to prevent Bernier from using the name during the Burnaby South by-election next week. Laura Lynn Tyler Thompson is the party's candidate. The lawsuit is also requesting a review of Elections Canada approval process. A spokesman from Bernier's PPC responded to the now request with an emailed statement. Quote, "We are confident that our party was registered in accordance with the rules and that these lawsuits have no legal bias," Martin Mass wrote. And I scroll down again. Dillon said he was forced to abandon plans to run a candidate, Jasjeet Dadwal, in the Burnaby South by-election, but said he plans to run a full slate in the October general election if he can reclaim the People's Party name. Quote, "The intention is to run in all 338 ridings," he said. "I think every community in Canada is ready for a different option." And I scroll down again. Dillon said it's Bernier's particular brand of politics that has emboldened him to fight for the name usage. Quote, "Their policies are what they stand for is just so divisive. I have to fight for what's rightfully ours," he said. "Their brand of politics should not be welcome in a place like Canada." Dillon, a Canadian-born son of immigrants, said he takes issue with Bernier's rhetoric around immigration. Quote, "My parents came to this country for a better life, and it would go against everything I believe in not to fight this," he said. So that's it right there. That's the crux of it. That's why he's doing this, just to get a little bit of press time and a little bit of airtime to say, I don't believe in what Maxime Bernier is doing. He's anti-immigration. And Mr. Bernier is certainly not anti-immigration. Mr. Bernier is in favor of immigration, 250,000 per year, vetted and have jobs and are coming to Canada to improve their life and have waited in line properly. So if you have a problem with that, Mr. Dillon, well, I guess we disagree fundamentally on some basic things. So I hope your lawsuit goes nowhere, and I hope it costs you some money. How about that? This whole Wilson-Raybould thing, though, there's so much smoke here, and I feel like if criminality is, if there is a sense that the Prime Minister himself pressured her, he's going to have to step down. And if he steps down, who's got name recognition and a great story to go into the 2019 election, right? The Attorney General that stood up to a Prime Minister and led the Liberal Party to another, I don't know. I hope not. Because Trudeau will be a lot easier to beat than Wilson-Raybould, I think. So that's it for today. Well, that's it for right now. Let's see what else happens today. I'm sure there's another shoe to drop. It's just waiting on the right time. Maybe Friday afternoon. We'll see. Thanks for watching, everybody. Check out the peoplespartyofcanada.ca because it doesn't belong to this guy. No, it doesn't. Nope. That's Maxime Bernier's. And you can check it out and vote for it in October. Thanks for watching.